There we go. We're live. Okay, Facebook world. I think this is the 6th one of these that we've done. And we've been pretty fortunate to bring some very cool guests in. And tonight we bring in a very cool guest. One of the few RMTs, at least in Canada, that has advanced their education enough to establish themselves as a PhD. So Eric and I are very pleased to have Donelda Gowan on with us. Donelda, maybe if you just want to tell us a little bit about yourself, including about how you got your PhD.
Well, thank you, first of all, for having me on here this evening. It's a pleasure and a privilege, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak with you guys and to engage with other massage therapists in your audience. And so thanks very much for having me. I do appreciate it.
Oh, no problem.
I was thinking in terms of my background, I always want to start off the story with I was born in a log cabin, but you probably want me to go like a little more recent than that. Yeah.
I'd love to hear about how you were born in a log cabin.
I do often say that I was raised by hillbillies. So I have a long-standing massage therapy career. This is 34 years this year. I am a graduate of the Canadian College of Massage and Hydrotherapy in Sutton, Ontario, and I graduated in 1986. So I am thrilled to be able to talk more about massage therapy, talk more about scholarship, talk more about recent events, history, past events. So yeah.
Perfect. Well, I think because you and Eric have a bit of a relationship, tonight is the first time that I've had the opportunity to meet you and chat with you. I think I'll kind of hand things over to Eric, and he had some questions that he wanted to go through with you, and I'll chime in wherever I can. But I think because you guys have that past history with each other, it's better for you guys to carry on the chat as opposed to me.
All right.
Thanks, Jamie. When you put it that way, it sounds like we were like in a romantic relationship.
Professional relationship.
Okay. Yeah. No, I'm really excited to have Donelda here. She was before she knew who I was. I had read a few of her papers that she had published, and she was a bit of somebody I kind of looked up to, and somebody that helped me along my academic journey as well. And when I was going through my graduate education, I remember reaching out to her a few times, and she offered really, really good advice. And I was lucky enough to get to meet her last year. I think it was last May. I was in Saskatoon teaching, and she showed me a couple nights on the booming metropolis of Saskatoon. And I made the mistake of going there at the beginning of May, thinking that it would be springtime, and it actually snowed a little bit. So I went for a run in shorts and a t-shirt and almost froze myself. So anyway, I'm excited to have you today, Donelda. So I thought just to start, if you would just want to I know a lot of your history and your story because we've chatted before quite a few times, but just kind of tell us a little bit about like what's your current, like what are you currently doing with your life and where are you working, and we'll kind of go from there.
Sure. Well, I have a few projects on the go, and lately my biggest project seems to sort of be me. I'm my biggest project lately since I convocated in 2017, in the fall of 2017. So for the last couple of years, I seem to have really immersed myself in, self-care and learning about just various strategies around personal leadership and professional development and personal development and adventure and fun. So I've been doing all kinds of really, I think, interesting things, and that's been sort of one of my passions of late. I seem to be able to fill my days with all kinds of growth and development things. I'm learning to speak Spanish. I learned to sail. I'm learning to ski, to golf, shoot skeet. I'm revisiting some old passions, horses, playing my guitar. So I'm sharing that partially because there is a lot to professional development, I will argue, that should contain some personal leadership and personal development. So that's why I say I've been one of my main projects in recent years.
I love that.
Other things that I've been working on, I am the Associate Director for the Center for Integrative Medicine in the Department of Community Health and Epidemiology at the College of Medicine at the University of Saskatchewan, and I have an adjunct professor role there, and it is an amazing job. I love my role. I love the work. I love all of the opportunities that it affords for me as a massage therapist, as a health services researcher, as a individual interested in personal and professional development and personal leadership and organizational leadership and all the things that come with that. The big piece of the role that is fascinating to me and exciting for me is the interprofessional collaboration. So one of our things that we work to foster is interprofessional education, interprofessional relationships. The tag, of course, you're probably aware of, is learning with, from, and about each other and one another. And so crossing disciplines, breaking down silos. We do some, I think, really interesting things, bridging even across colleges, from medicine to engineering to vet med and back and forth and across. And so it's a really terrific role, and I love it. So that's one of my other main projects. I am also the research chair for the Massage Therapists Association of Saskatchewan, another role that I love. We have a dynamic organization. We have a terrific board of directors. We have an amazing executive director. We've got fantastic staff. I am always known to say that I am so proud of our Massage Therapists Association of Saskatchewan, of our members. We are 800 and some strong in an unregulated province where people choose to belong to our organization, and they don't have to. They choose to meet our membership requirements, and they don't have to, but they do. So I'm very proud of our Saskatchewan massage therapists, always have been.
That's amazing. I think Lori Green is involved in Saskatchewan as well, isn't she?
She's the dynamite executive director of which I was speaking. Yeah. And my third main project is I'm the chair-elect of INCAM. It's the Canadian Interdisciplinary Research Network for Complementary and Alternative Medicine Research. And I'm the chair-elect, so I'm new in the role, and very excited about the organization, very excited about what it will mean for massage therapists to be involved in the organization. We are hosting the next INCAM symposium, so the research conference research meeting in Saskatoon, crossing our fingers, in November of 2020. So it'll be the first time that it's been hosted in Saskatoon. It's usually, well, it alternates Toronto, Vancouver, and sometimes Calgary, but this will be the first time that we'll host it here in Saskatoon. So I'm looking forward to showing off our beautiful city.
I sure hope that everything is going to be inside in November in Saskatoon.
Well, you never know. You never know. You never know, because it could actually be winter in May, but usually it isn't. Believe me. Hopefully it'll be beautiful. We'll be down by the river. That's where the venue is, and hopefully it'll be gorgeous.
So that's, I mean, there's we got a lot to unpack there, a lot of things we could explore with it. Just tell us, I'm curious about more about INCAM. Is it INCAM, INCAM?
INCAM, that's correct.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So what's their kind of mandate? What do they do?
Yeah, well, INCAM is considered to be essentially an idea lab.
Okay.
So we exist to, the tagline would be, we exist to foster excellence in complementary and alternative, or complementary and integrative research. So the mandate is to provide opportunities for researchers to collaborate, or to build their research skills, or to disseminate their research, right? Because we have these conferences or these symposia every 2 years. And I will say also a really big part of why the organization exists is to promote research capacity in practitioners that might not otherwise have access to research learning. And that is a really important role. And that's essentially how I got interested in graduate school in the first place, was attendance at my very first in-cam research symposium in Toronto in 2004.
Nice. Yeah, because I think you told me this story before that you went there and you just kind of elaborate to the listeners and watchers about your experience at that conference and how that led you into the journey to where you are today.
Yeah, well, when I got there, I had an undergrad degree of 4-year honors degree in psychology, and it was because it was an honors degree, I did do a research thesis. And so, I mean, I wasn't a complete stranger to research, but that was research in a fairly, conventional psychological framework. My undergrad thesis was related to massage therapy as well. I was looking at arousal states, relationship with massage therapy and arousal states, and we did a fun little quasi-experimental thesis for that. But I got to this symposium in Toronto, and it was just one presenter after the next from varied fields, right? So there was osteopathy, naturopathy. There's, I think maybe, there was a little bit of massage therapy research as well. And, there's some traditional Chinese medicine. And I sat in the audience, and, I always make this joke that, it was just such a geek fest, and my hair was just blowing back with all of this amazing information coming to me. But the fascinating thing was that I couldn't understand anything of what they were saying. I was pestering the person sitting beside me, who's a massage therapist with a master's degree, Pamela Hodgson. She was in Newfoundland at the time, and I just kept peppering her with questions. What does this mean? What do they mean by this? Well, how do they do that? And I was fascinated, and I knew that I needed to unlock the language, and I needed to get the skills in order to understand what they were saying, because a little bit of what I could understand was just so fascinating.
Well, I know that. I just wanted to jump in, and you're probably not prepared for this one, anyways. But I'm just looking through some of the questions that Eric's going to ask you, and I don't think this is asked in there. But I don't know if you've had a chance to look at the blog that I write or anything like that. But quite often I get people who send me some angry emails over some of the stuff that we write about, and a lot of it is usually centered around research and how I've had people that have written in and said, my anecdotal experience is far more important than research. I reject research and don't use it in my practice. So I love the fact that, somebody like yourself went to this research conference and went, I'm blown away and this is amazing. So do you have any advice for somebody who maybe is thinking, I'd like to start putting a bit more research in my practice, and what do I do with it? Especially for those that maybe are relying on anecdotal experience more than what the research is telling us now.
Yeah, well, I think if we consider research in terms of a language, there is, of course, a barrier, right? So I'm learning to speak Spanish, and it is very effortful. And I have multiple sources. I've got textbooks on the go. I've got, YouTube videos. I've got blogs that I read. I watch children's television in Spanish to try and help me to get the language, because I can't move much further, and I can't apply it to my daily life until I'm able to improve my skills and unlock the language. So I think that was my experience at the symposium, is that it's all doable. It's all learnable. All you need is you can ask the person beside you, what do they mean by this? What does that mean? Or you can start to avail yourself of all of the amazing resources that that we have. My dear friend and colleague, Dr. Susan Tupper, and I did a fun thing in Saskatchewan, building with the attempt to build research literacy. We did a journal club, but we called it the Itty Bitty Book Club, because our idea was, if you can read a book, you can read a journal article. It's just a really short book. It's got an introduction, it's got a plot, oftentimes it has a sequel. Oftentimes, there's plot twists in the middle of it. So I would encourage people to just give yourself some permission to immerse yourself in varied platforms, learn the language. And I would say I might be a little bit critical of individuals who preemptively disregard it. How are you disregarding it if you don't have the language? What are you disregarding? Do you understand what you're disregarding?
And I would venture to say no, especially if you're not even starting to read it or willing to read it to
Right.
try to apply it. Then, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But thank you for that.
And I think that's one of the biggest problems that we see in the profession is that there's not an appreciation or an understanding of research or its value, because it's just not something that is inherently kind of given to us in our education, unless you've been lucky enough to have a couple instructors that are really strong about it. I mean, this is, we could talk about this for days, I know, but what would you say, just because we're talking about research right now, what would you say, like, is the state of RMT research in the world?
Well, I think that there have been some excellent contributions even in the last 10 years. I think, my thought from a scholarship perspective is that there's so many possibilities. There's so many questions that one could ask. There's so many good questions that one could ask. And there's lots of not that great questions that you could ask and kind of do get asked too. So that's maybe a bit of a problem right now, because it's almost in trying to come up with a research question, it's almost an embarrassment of riches, isn't it? Because what do you want to know? Well, there's so much that we don't know. There's so many questions that we could ask. So I know that's not really an answer to your question, but I think that when we look at the pool of research in existence now in the field, it's pretty scattered, eh? Like it's pretty broad. I have a huge, well, I won't say, I mean, I have an interest in health services research. So for me, that's a pretty rich area. So by health services research, I might define that as research about the profession or on the profession. And so that's really interesting to me. And we have a pretty rich chunk of research already. No, I don't know whether people will agree with me on that, but I think we do. You've produced some, Eric?
I have. I haven't. I think I should be using this pandemic to try and get it published. It's kind of sitting in limbo right now. I just need to do some final touches on it and send it to some journals. But yeah, I mean, I think, kind of leads into the next question is let's talk about some of your research. I think like when you did one of the first papers I found that helped me form my research questions and helped me getting focused on my master's was your master's project, where you did your thesis was on research utilization and evidence-based practice among Saskatchewan RMTs. And I found this really influential because it kind of formed some ideas around like the own research I did, which was basically understanding the research evidence for BC RMTs and exploring their barriers and facilitators for the research use and practice. Now, which I think kind of goes with what you were saying, is that and I found doing that, there is a lot of research out there that are kind of looking at things the profession needs, and there's lots of people asking questions, but there's not necessarily always a lot of, there's solutions suggested, but I don't know if anyone's actually taken them and actually ran with them. So that's what I found. I was like, there's all these papers, and not just massage therapists, but other manual and movement therapists. And it seems that oftentimes the people come up with great ideas and ask great questions and have great ways they think we can move our profession forward, but they don't tend to be, no one seems to act on them. Which is frustrating, but anyway, do you want to just kind of tell us a little bit about some of the research that you've done and how
Sure.
you think that research could be used to kind of push our profession forward?
Sure. Well, and I will say we're not in any unique state, though, are we, in terms of that gap in between the conduct of research, its dissemination, and its uptake. It most certainly is not a situation unique to massage therapists. It's across the board in health professions, but it's not even just health professions. In other fields, the uptake of research evidence into practice is slow and sort of a grueling process often. And there's probably a lot of reasonable explanations for that. And I do think it's important that we acknowledge that it isn't anything inherent about massage therapists or the field that precipitate that. It's a shared phenomenon. Now, we do have some uniqueness that I think throw up additional barriers to that. And, we were already talking about that. And, Jamie, you're asking about that in terms of, massage college and education. And, does that make more of a barrier for immersion in research? And of course it does. It's it's not part of the university structure. It's not part of that culture. There isn't that broad sort of liberal arts education where you might be exposed to research from psychology or sociology that could, really pique your interest, which was certainly the case for me, right? Like I think you asked me the question about what would I advise other massage therapists to, maybe to unlock that interest in in research. Well, maybe forget about massage therapy research. Maybe read some psychology research. Maybe you're interested in some of the human behavior phenomena. And I would challenge anyone to read something about human behavior and then as a massage therapist not be working away in your brain about how that applies to massage therapy, because it's going to happen, right? You're going to do that. So that would be one of my other suggestions. Just read interesting research and see how that applies to massage therapy. Now I've gone off and I've completely ignored your questionnaire.
Oh, that's how the show is anyway. We just kind of randomly keep talking. So I think that actually leads into an interesting discussion worth having, is that we hear oftentimes that people are like, oh, there's no massage therapy research. There's very little massage therapy research done by massage therapists specifically for massage therapy. There's some, but it's not nearly as much as you see in psychology or physical therapy. But I think it's really important, and this is my bias coming out, is that I think we need to take knowledge and research from those other areas, because they all, like you said, psychology applies to being human.
Sure.
It applies to what we do. And I think anybody that discredits that is, I think they're missing the bigger picture of what it is that we do.
Yeah, no, well, I would totally agree. And in terms of integrative medicine, that's one of the principles that or one of the foundations that most of us would consider integrative medicine to be built on, is that it is very much possible, advisable, and admirable to engage in knowledge transfer and exchange between fields, and in healthcare and health services, integrating evidence-based practices, evidence-informed thought from one field into another field, integrating to come up with the best potential solution is the way to go. Building a healthcare system on integrating the best components of things like traditional medicine, things like massage therapy, things that are perhaps outside of the conventional mainstream biomedical realm, but are valuable and shown to be valuable, have evidence of being valuable, integrating those together. And it works both ways too, doesn't it? So as a massage therapist, as an integrative massage therapist, what are you borrowing from psychology? What are you borrowing from medical research? So, that's kind of an interesting thing too. And I think maybe where we sometimes get into a little bit of an issue, we're in this bizarre sort of limbo where we're often, I'm going to say, admonishing massage therapists to stay within their scope of practice. And yet at the same time, we're not encouraging them to think, okay, what are MD's research findings about, I don't know, empathy that we could relate to massage therapy practice and make ourselves better massage therapists? So we have to be able to engage in that knowledge translation and transfer without contravening our scope of practice. Does that make sense? You know what I mean? Yeah. So, yeah.
I love that. I think it's a great point. I don't know why I'm getting so much feedback on my mic here. But we got a couple good little comments here from our friend Adette over in New Zealand. When we're talking about critical thinking, she's saying it's not necessarily embedded into all massage therapy curriculum. And part of the problem there is that because many of the colleges are private businesses rather than universities. So I think that's globally an issue that we face as massage therapists, that a lot of the education stuff comes down, or sort of the research stuff comes down to the education that we got, that we're not always necessarily looking at research. But I love the point that you made about we're always being told to stay within our scope, and yet we're not looking at the research that's for other people that is also applicable to us. Yeah.
Well, it's one of my joys in scholarship, and in my work, and also in my pastimes, is to think about, how does that thing apply to this thing? How does what you're doing make my life better? How can we integrate some of those things? So yeah. Which is what you asked me about the master's work, and I didn't answer you, but I am happy to, and I'm really grateful that was helpful for you, Eric, for your research as well. And that's just it. Jamie, when you're talking about people's reluctance around research too, I do think that we have, and it's kind of research's fault, and educators probably like me who have failed to present research in an encouraging light, right? So when we're looking at what research is about, we can look on the screen and we can say, well, Donelda had a question, and so she started looking the research to see whether other people were asking that question, and then she reads what they found, and then she decides to ask that question maybe in a different way, or what she thinks is a better way, and then she publishes those results. And then Eric says, I wonder what's happening in British Columbia. I'd like to take some of that information and incorporate it into what we know. And so do we fail to do a good job at sharing with individuals who are maybe not appreciating, that's your word, Eric, the research appreciation, that don't have that research appreciation? Are we kind of failing to just give people the right attitude because we don't present it well? And I would be guilty of, I think, making it seem really awful.
Well, I think it comes down to I think this is stuff you and I have had this conversation before, Donelda, about there is not that research appreciation. There's kind of that like academic ignorance, not willfully, but it's not part of the culture of our profession, unlike a lot of the other healthcare professions. And no one's perfect, obviously. But I think the stuff that I was thinking would be really important would be to have, I think it comes down to the teachers in the schools, the people that are working at the private colleges, to lay that foundation. Because you could have a curriculum that says this is what should be taught, but if you don't have the people to teach it, and you don't have the knowledge base of people there to educate and to make it interesting and fun, I think it becomes lost.
Yeah.
The message never comes across.
Yeah. It might be people too. I think relationships and people and personalities. So when I was in massage college in 1985, 86, 87, that was the time Janet Kahn, she's our American, she's a PhD massage therapist, and I learned of her and her work when I was in college. And of course, I've been a huge fangirl for 34 years now, and have had the pleasure and privilege of working with her as well. But I think maybe that's one thing that we're missing, and you guys are changing that with your platform, right? You kind of need a relationship, you need a face, you need a personality, you need somewhere to go, which is, again, when we have been doing some research literacy work for MTAS, that has been part of let's have some fun with it. We'll get together, bottle of wine if that's permitted, club soda if not, and we'll read a paper together, and have some laughs and make it more fun. So yeah, so there's all kinds of possibilities like that. For the master's work, what I was interested in was massage therapists' perceptions of research and their research utilization, right? So I did a mixed method study, and that's what I did for the PhD as well. And it's my favorite thing to be able to have components where you're looking at the qualitative aspect, and to have components where we were drawing a logistic regression model in that case, but to look at relationships, but also to look at the descriptive information, and also to really gather some data that tells a good story, and by a good story I mean tells people's stories in their own words that that we can represent. And so that data is already 10 years old. So I'd be very interested to know how that has changed. So feeding back into your question about what do I think the, sort of the climate is now, well, I don't know the answer to that, because I'd have to run that study again. And I'd be very curious to know how that has changed. I mean, our findings were, I thought it was really interesting. We discovered that, and again, that was 10 years that those questions were being asked and answered. But massage therapists had a positive regard for research, but in terms of their willingness to apply it to their practice, we found that there was some limitations if it contradicted the knowledge that they feel they gain from their practice experience, which is a fascinating thing, I think. So the question that we asked is, how willing are you to change your beliefs if research contradicts something that you've learned in school, something that you've learned or you knew before you went to school in massage college, or something that you've learned in your practice? And we have we know from psychology that we have a cognitive bias to find evidence for that which we already know.
Mm-hmm. It's funny. I just wrote a blog post about this exact thing, and one of the
did you publish it yet?
Yeah, it's on the website. So one of the big things that and it's strictly just my opinion, is that one of the reasons that people quite often don't want that research to challenge what they're doing is because what they're doing in their practice becomes part of their identity, and they're known as, say, the person who's the best manual therapy X technique provider, and they've built a practice where they've been very successful. And then if a research article comes out and says, well, maybe the description behind what you're doing isn't exactly what they've been saying it's doing, it challenges that identity and can challenge their practice and everything that goes with it.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? We did have a component in that master's work where we were looking at characteristics of providers that would relate to research utilization. And I mean, we didn't find we didn't maybe even find what we thought we might find. So the personal characteristics, I think we still have to figure that out, right? So, what is it that gets people really excited about learning new things and other people not so much?
Yeah. Eric, have you got anything to add? Because there's just a couple comments and questions here that I'll throw in.
I just wanted to, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, Donelda, but one of the parts that I found really fascinating about your master's paper there was, I think it was 60% of people didn't want to change their beliefs if it challenged what they learned in massage school. Is that, am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, I think that's about right.
Yeah. Okay, good. Because I use that in every single lecture I do. I almost always bring that up, and I'm like, I haven't actually checked the original source in quite a few years, so I just want to make sure I wasn't full of crap. So
yeah, well, it's correct, bearing in mind that we asked, are you always willing to change? Yeah,
and I asked similar questions in my master's project as well, and it was very similar, that people tended to hang on to. Mine was qualitative, so I didn't have numbers to assign to it, but it was basically the same idea. People, what you learn in school is very hard to unlearn.
Yeah. Oh, it's so true, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So we'll look at a couple of comments and questions here. And I love this first one. It's from our buddy Richard, when he says, "I love this woman. Grab some wine and review research for fun." Anybody who knows Richard knows that he would love that. So he's got a couple questions here. One is, have you had an opportunity to have a say with curriculum development or review with regards to massage schools anywhere in Canada?
Not recently. I did have a role years ago. I taught at a massage college here in Saskatoon, and in fact, I taught at a college here in Saskatoon for 7 years. And I was given the role when Saskatchewan was moving into a longer hours-based curriculum, because I was trained in Ontario, so I came from having that longer hours-based curriculum, and so I did have some opportunity to have some influence there, but no, not in recent years, for sure. That's a good question, and I don't know who it's changing curriculum. They always make the joke at the medical school that it's easier to relocate a cemetery than to change medical curriculum. And so, that's probably true for us too, for massage therapy, because we have a long European history in Canada for underscoring our education. And so, I think it is quite challenging to change curriculum.
Okay, excellent. And then Richard's got another one. Do you feel that an introduction to more psychology research would be a way for us to go?
Yeah, well, of course, I've already identified my bias. I have a psychology background, so I'm going to say yes, for sure. But if not psychology, why not sociology? I think, as far as integrative medicine is concerned, health behaviors, human health behaviors, and how things like massage therapy could influence or alter or shore up health behaviors. That's, to me, one of the most fascinating areas of research right now, and the questions that I think would be dynamite to ask and to seek to answer. So I would absolutely be looking at psychology research for that. But sociology too, for sure. Health promotion from an upstream perspective as well, for sure.
I just think that it's really important to. I think it would be important for us to focus more on that stuff than the kind of the go-to is like biomechanical or tissue-based or like kind of disease processes type thing tends to be the focus. Like, people are always looking for these very biomedical, very like linear kind of problems and using research to solve them, rather than understanding, like when we talk about the biopsychosocial, right? Yeah. I think it's, for what we do, I think we'd be better served by understanding more that, like you said, the health promotion and the psychology and the social aspects of health and wellness, I think makes way more sense for our profession than all the biomedical stuff.
Well, I mean, certainly there's lots to go around. There's certainly no reason why we can't look at and use information that has that, that more linear focus as well. But what we lack is broad, well-structured frameworks, theories, and models, and we could encourage ourselves absolutely to look at population health, look at epidemiology, look at fields where there are, where there's a rich history of building frameworks, theories, and models. And so we've sort of skipped over a big part of that. So for the doctoral work, we were looking at safety issues in the field of massage therapy, and we were looking at safety issues, but we were also looking at, what's the current discourse, what's the current understanding around patient safety incidents or adverse events. And so, we wanted to know, what's the current state of knowledge in the field of massage therapy around safety. So that was my first question. So that's what we started looking into. And then, of course, as the research process does and dictates, then the next thing is you go to, well, what are other people saying about it? What do other people know about patient safety? What other fields do about classification and operationalization and definitions? And what does biomedical practice do about safety taxonomies? So we undertook that question as well and corralled and organized that information in a scoping review. And so it is interesting that this field, as you say, we skip over that and go into the the hands-on kind of stuff, which is what we have a deeper, richer history of, and yet we have kind of skipped over some of the scholarship around some of the important foundations. And safety, of course, well, it's a pretty fascinating topic that gets very little airplay in this field, except for maybe right now in a pandemic.
Yeah.
So we also have another question on here from our friend Jamie Early is your paper on the internet somewhere? And I just did a quick Google Scholar search with your name, and a number of papers came up, but I don't know if you have one that you wouldn't mind sharing, and we can post in the comments, or
I'm happy
email it to the people or whatever.
I know too that if you go to ResearchGate, all her papers are on there.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a free membership, I think, and you can just you can request them, and most of them I think are there, aren't they, Donelda?
Yeah, I mean, ResearchGate is a really good, it's a good resource, and it's a good source of information for sure. And it's a good connection, absolutely. Now, this is the part where I tell you that my lead story about the last couple of years being the project of fun and frivolity and personal development and adventure. This is the part where I tell you that I've not yet published out of my doctoral work. So I'm getting right to it. This isolation is going to encourage me to get back to submitting some papers for publication. The crazy thing is that my thesis is it's a sandwich thesis, so the papers are already contained within the document. I just have to.
Brilliant. Makes me feel better knowing that I'm not the only one. But I remember you and I had a conversation last year where we talked about having like some PTSD kind of postgraduate school where you just want to just run away and hide from anything to do with it.
I know, and you'll notice, Eric, that I've sort of flipped my narrative a little bit. That now I'm saying that it's just all been, it's been because of all the fun that I've been having, not so much that I'm, just slowly recovering and crawling back to humanity after a grueling experience. I don't want to share that too much because I really want people to go to graduate school and do massage therapy research.
Yeah, I mean, that speaks to my bias too, is I think we need more of us. And I think, my thoughts are that it would be great if we had like an undergraduate program, to start with. So at least people that maybe entered the program, maybe they didn't have that, maybe they didn't realize that research was something that was interesting to them, but by the time they were finished, they're like, I would really like to go pursue a career in research. But as it is now, you have to get it, as an RMT, you have to go back and get a degree if you didn't have one. So it's almost like you have to go backwards to move forwards.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, it's a peculiar situation that we're in for sure, and we do have some unique limitations based on our system, but we have every opportunity in overcoming those limitations and doing some work.
Well, I think that your story is, it's a good example of you can do it, right? So you were an RMT, you went to pursue your master's and your PhD, and now you're actually working at a university and involved in the academic world. So it is possible, and I think my hope for anybody that watches this is it gives people that some belief that that being an RMT isn't a dead end job. I hear that all the time, like. It's no different than being a carpenter or a plumber, where it's like that's all you can do. You can pursue further education and still be involved in the profession, but maybe at a different level or a different way.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, what were some of your thoughts about, like, how would you, if you could, in an ideal world, how would you see us as a profession moving forward to being kind of kind of a main part of kind of the healthcare system, whereas right now we're kind of on the periphery. But how would we move into that field?
Well, I think I would borrow on some wisdom from another mentor of mine, my boss at the University of Saskatchewan, and he often talks about the fact that you need to really understand any system that you want to be a part of. And I wonder if that feeds back into my thinking that maybe we haven't done the heavy lifting that lays a foundation where we understand the system that we want to be a part of, and the scholarship, develop our own scholarship in line with a system that operates in a relatively predictable way. And so I think that's what we need to do, and I think that is what we are doing. And I would say, in my experience over the last 3 decades, we've almost come, I think we've almost come around again to a greater appreciation of our value and what we can contribute. And so that's what I think we need to do. I think we need to devote the effort to simplifying our very complex contributions in ways that make sense to the system that we want to be a part of. And I think in the process of doing that, we might actually even start making some more sense to ourselves. And that would be welcome, wouldn't it?
Oh, for sure. I think you alluded to it earlier too, that there's so many questions that we could ask as a profession, and like research questions, and where do we go? And I always think that, across the country in Canada, I don't know how many RMTs there are. I think we got 5,000 in BC and something like 13,000 in Ontario, and then 800 plus in Saskatoon. And there's so many RMTs out there. There's so much capacity for potential to do and be involved in research and to move this profession forward. I hope that I would just like to see more drive, and sometimes there can be a little bit of apathy. And I think there's, I think it's important for those of us that are determined and have ideas and then have education to try and push everybody forward to say, we can do this. Like, let's do this as a group. Let's do this. We're a team. We're a profession. Let's all support each other, because I think otherwise, I think we risk being stuck and not moving forward.
Yeah, but I wonder too, if if the two of you do you think though that we've done some of that? So you guys are in a position to and are, I think, changing the culture around willingness to embrace new ideas and to move forward. But do you think that we've sort of created around research specifically, that we have created some of that barrier ourselves, just simply in the narrow way that we allow research to be perceived? So I think most practitioners look at research and think it's this punitive thing that's telling you that you can't do what you've been doing, or what you're doing doesn't work, and no wonder people are reluctant to look further into research if that's what they think that research is about. And I'm saying, hey, listen, one of the things that research does is provides clarity. So the doctoral work that we were looking at is really, we need some clarity around defining patient safety incidents, adverse events in massage therapy. What does that look like? We weren't looking from an epidemiological point of view on risk. We were looking at what is the risk? How do we define risk? How do we define when bad things happen in massage therapy? So I would like us to change the conversation around research a little bit. I'd like us to change the conversation where we invite people to think about, listen, we can organize our world. What's that phrase from rhetoric, right? It says that, the language that we use produces the culture in which we live. So maybe we need to start thinking about the language that we use.
Yeah, I'll go for a second. I think I agree with everything that you just said, and I think it's been leading up to those comments is when we're looking at research. I love what you said about it can actually simplify what we're doing, and I think all too often we go and take a continuing education course that makes it sound like what we're doing is so complicated and that we're having these profound effects and everything is so complicated, whereas really what we're doing is, for the most part, fairly simple when we look at the grand scheme of things. And I think the more that we get into looking at research that challenges those things that make it sound so complicated, maybe when we're talking to our patient, we don't feel like we're sounding smart enough because it's not that complicated thing. And people don't like to get challenged with that research. And I actually love one of the comments that we've got here. Alice says, is it possible that RMTs think of research as quantitative only and don't really know much about qualitative or mixed methods? Qualitative kind of brings the fun into it for some minds. So looking at focus groups and qualitative descriptions. So sitting around and having a glass of wine and talking about this stuff. I'd love for us to have, I know some friends do a PT pub night where maybe we hop on here and everybody has a drink and we just read a research paper together and dissect it.
That's kind of what we're doing right now.
Yeah.
I mean, that sounds good. Yeah, no, I agree with that. I agree with the comment that there are lots of more accessible forms of research. I mean, we don't have to beat everybody over the head with systematic reviews and meta-analysis and then tell them, look, if you can't decipher this forest plot, then then forget it. That's not true at all. There's lots of research, as that comment was, there's lots of qualitative research that can shift the way that we do things. And I guess that was the other thing in our master's work. We were looking at a definition of research utilization that included directly applying research to your work, but also in two other ways. So one would be using research to just change the way that you think. And changing the way that you think is obviously going to change the way that you do things. And then thirdly, research can be used in a persuasive way. So, I mean, I would argue pretty ferociously that one of the reasons that we don't necessarily have maybe the position or the impact within the system that we'd like to is because we fail to use research in a appropriately persuasive way. So persuasive doesn't mean that you're trying to convince someone of something. It simply means that you are using evidence to inform policy. And it's one of the beautiful things about research, and we don't typically do that. And policy, to be good policy, must be driven by data.
Yeah.
And I really love what Alice said there, because I mean, I did my master's. I did a focus group, a qualitative study, and so I agree. I think my bias suggests that I think qualitative or mixed methods research, particularly qualitative, it fits really well with what we do as a profession, because it's very difficult to assign numbers oftentimes to what we do, but understanding kind of the meanings of the interactions or the meanings of our treatment or how that impacts the person experiencing them, I think gives us a lot of useful data, which then we could maybe go and take some of that and do specific quantitative studies with. But I think the qualitative really provides a rich set of data and information that allows us to really understand what's important to people, whether it's practitioners or patients, and then I think that can inform a lot of our decision making and a lot of our future research directions. So I love that comment. I don't think people really understand what it is.
Yeah, no, I agree. And Jamie, that's what you were speaking about in terms of things being unnecessarily complex to to describe what we do or to try to understand what we do. And I think that there's sort of different levels of engagement with research as well. And so, there is going to have to be the heavy lifting where there is the rigorous, systematic, applied, vetted thinking, but everybody doesn't have to be in on that.
Yeah.
Right. So when we want to be able to communicate intelligently about what we do, we simply have to be able to have some more simple models, and those can come from very complex frameworks and theories. So I'd be very pleased for us to get there.
Some more comments we've got coming in again from Jamie. She's asking, she's not in Canada, but can you point a direction towards getting involved in research? And a couple of things that come to the top of my head would be looking at like the Massage Therapy Research Foundation, and also just maybe even learning how to write a case study, because under case studies are sort of how like randomized control trials and things like that are built. Is if we have a small collection of case studies that we can start to build on, that could be one way that we start getting a little bit more involved in research. And I'll let you two add your comments to that as well.
Yeah, no, that's a good answer for sure. Massage Therapy Foundation, dynamite resource, some funding available as well. And yeah, you're spot on in terms of writing clinical case reports. That's a great way to actually contribute to the knowledge base and to learn the ropes in terms of that particular form of research. And we have a journal that those clinical case reports can be submitted to. There's learning through the Massage Therapy Foundation. InCam that I spoke about earlier, there's a funding competition coming up in June for, it's a small amount, but all dollars help in funding research. And you have to be a member of InCam, you have to be, you do have to be a member of InCam. So for our listener who was not from Canada, InCam is a chapter of an international society, and the international society is called, the short form is ISCMR, and I think it's the International Society for traditional and complementary medicine research. And so InChem is a chapter of that. So I would encourage people to look into that. You can be anywhere in the world. And at the symposia, there sometimes are people from around the world doing just pretty fascinating research, everything from natural health products. I met a fellow from Ecuador doing some cool things with medicinal plants that you find in the jungle. So yeah, it's cool stuff. And then again, you know, we sit in the audience and listen to people talk about their research and say, that would be a really interesting application for massage therapy, maybe just using those methods. Never thought about using those methods before. Maybe it's a research method that you didn't think about. So that idea of an idea lab is something that I would like to see us engage with, you know, together as massage therapists too, and also interprofessionally.
Yeah, Eric, anything to add?
No, I love that answer. So I'm just going to let that sit there. That's great.
Okay, so we've got a couple more comments on here. Good one from Sandra. She's saying, we need to make the desire to be open to research for RMTs safer and more appetizing. By nature, we're a caring and compassionate profession, and if we can make learning and implementing the research into practice less stressful, we may find more therapists may become more interested. So it sounds like we're going to have to do more wine nights looking at research to make this make it less stressful and more appetizing.
Wine makes everything better.
It does. It does. And then we've got a question specifically for you, Donelda, from our friend Jocelyn. She's asking, in your paper, Steps Towards Massage Therapy Guidelines, there's a section that discusses NICU nurses and their skilled decision-making, sometimes based on intuition and cues from a baby as to when to start treatment for antibiotics for sepsis and how the BPC anticipates experienced massage therapists may be responding in a similar fashion with clients with information they gather via communication, interaction, observation, and palpation. So Jocelyn's wondering if you could elaborate more on what those cues might be.
Oh, that's a beautiful question. Yeah, and that is such a fascinating circumstance. And what Jocelyn is speaking to is this. I can tell you who contributed the bulk of that idea was Keith Eric Grant. You guys probably know Keith, yeah, from San Diego Pain Summit. What I think Keith is perhaps the only astrophysicist / massage therapist that I know. And yeah, that was a lot of that work came from Penner, I believe it is, in nursing, and just that idea of the implicit knowledge. So the expert level implicit knowledge. And so she wrote in her book about, yeah, so a nurse in the ICU sees this little preemie baby, and they look at it and they say, oh, well, that baby needs, you know, X, Y, Z. The novice nurse is standing there looking at the baby and looking at the expert nurse and saying, how did you know that? Well, just the way the baby looked, right? There's something about the way that baby looked, and the nurse, the expert nurse, knew what to do. So I think we do that in massage therapy a lot, and that's one of those complex aspects of what we do that we need to figure out a way to elegantly describe. And so in our paper on best practices and exploring the prospect of guidelines, that's what we were doing, is looking at nursing, looking at the discipline scholarship. How do they describe that? So for massage therapy, we have not yet articulated what those cues would be. So great question.
It would be kind of fun to develop what those cues would be.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, we don't have, at this point, any more questions coming in. Eric, is there anything you wanted to touch on with Donelda?
I mean, God, I could spend all night here with you. This is great. I think, you know, without
apparently we're doing a couple more, Donelda. So
yeah, without jumping down too many more rabbit holes. I guess, you know, I did a podcast last week with some fellows in Ontario, and they asked me a very interesting question, and so I thought I would kind of make it a little more specific. But if there was one piece of information, one thing you would want all massage therapists to know, what would that be?
Well, I have had this quote kicking around in my brain. So students will have heard me say it. And, I've done continuing education myself over the years with massage therapists. And so, participants in courses will have heard me say it. And the quote is, I think, attributed to Einstein. And it says, look, like everything has to be made as simple as possible, but no more simple than that. So that's what I want massage therapists to know. And Jamie, it's from your conversation about the difference between complex ideas and simple articulation. And so we have to be really particular about the language that we use. And I'm all over this whole idea of rhetoric. At our last in-camp symposium in Montreal, we had a brilliant keynote speaker. Her name is Colleen Dirksen, and she's from Ryerson, and she is rhetoric is her area of expertise, and it's that idea that that the language shapes our social experience. And so I would like all massage therapists to know that we can abandon what is no longer serving us because it is inaccurate or misdirected. But I think that I don't want people to confuse abandoning old ideas with appreciating our real value. So I think that our history has been, and I mean, my college, it was very much a European tradition. And so, essentially, that you open the fire hose on people and you just throw a few hundred years of knowledge and information, and you keep continuing on with that over the decades. And I think we're at a position where that's no longer serving us. We need to, what I'm hoping that I can clearly enunciate is that abandoning old ideas could in fact give us an opportunity to really polish the really valuable, beautiful, complex service that we have to offer. So there's nothing taken away or missing. In fact, we really just get to focus in on our contribution.
Does anybody else on here want to give her a standing ovation after that comment? Actually, I really love that, Donelda, because one of the things that I like when I get those scathing emails that I talk about is a lot of people are saying, the instructors that we had in the past and some of the research people that we had in the past that did things on trigger points and different things, and saying we can't disregard anything they did. And I'm sitting there going, it's not that we're disregarding what they did. At the time, what they did was it was life-changing for therapists. It was the most up-to-date thing. But that was 20, 30 years ago. And the research has updated us since then. So we're not saying that those are bad people or what they did was bad, anything like that. We should 100% show those people respect for everything that they did to help our profession. But it's just the times have changed since then.
Yeah.
So to me, that's right in line with what you were just talking about.
Yeah. Well, and of course, I have great compassion for any students who sat in my lectures years and years ago, and then now when I tell them, yeah, you've got to be willing to change as new information comes along, and you may have been taught in school such and such, and they say, yeah, by you.
I think it's really important, though. And one thing that when Jamie and I teach, or when I teach my own, is I think the one thing we always try to say, which is goes exactly along the lines of what you're saying, is that change is constant, and that if we can accept that change is just part of life and part of as what we do in healthcare, then it means we don't have to throw out those old ideas necessarily. We can appreciate the value of what that is, and if those didn't happen, they maybe wouldn't provide us with the information to get to us to where we are now, which is more towards a more or less wrong narrative or understanding. And so I think it's really important for anybody to realize that we're not throwing anyone on the bus here. We're just saying this is a better way of a strong way of thinking and of doing, and that's okay, because that's normal. That's what science is, and that's how we're going to move forward as a profession.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you don't agree with it, by all means, feel free to conduct some research and show it's wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. Brilliant.
Challenge everything.
Challenge everything.
Yeah. So before we close anything down, I think there's a couple of comments here that are really important to share, because I think Eric and I probably feel the same way, but one's from our friend Deetria. She says, "Thank you so much for sharing, Donelda. I'm excited to get to see and meet you virtually. It's inspiring for us to have RMTs with a PhD in our profession. Congrats on your PhD and thank you for your work." And I think Eric and I would both echo the same thing.
Yeah.
Thanks,
And
Deetria.
Deetria is, she's got a master's, and she's
the next PhD.
And she has desires to be a PhD. So Deetria, we're calling you right now.
Yeah.
Terrific.
Yeah, I can't wait to see you do it.
Just go do it.
Yeah. And then we've got another one from Alice again. She says, "Your light is blinding. I'm so very inspired to stick with my research studies." Thank you to all three of us. But I think tonight the thanks really goes to Donelda over Eric and I.
Yeah.
Well, you're very welcome.
So quickly, if anybody else has any questions or comments that they want to drop in, go ahead and drop them in, and we'll kind of give it a couple seconds. But again, we owe you a huge debt of gratitude and a huge thanks tonight, Donelda. It was amazing to get to chat with you. We'd love to do it again.
Yeah, the pleasure was mine.
But it was a lot of fun and great to learn from you. And I hope that everybody starts looking at your research papers and seeing what we can do to change our profession.
Yeah, thanks.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Perfect. Another one just from Adette saying thank you, which is great because she was sharing some stuff with some massage therapists over in New Zealand. So we're getting a little bit global on here, and same with Jamie. She's down in the US. So hopefully we're making a little dent across the world tonight.
Great.
And making some change.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on, Donelda. It was great to see you again and connect with you. And it seems like the people have really got some really positive things to say. So this thing will be on the internet forever after this. So people can come back and share and watch it as much as they want. Yeah.
Well, thank you both very much for the opportunity. This was great to chat with you. I'm grateful for your efforts, and thanks for including me.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
So we'll end it there. So hopefully everybody who's watching hopefully enjoyed tonight. And if you want to drop any more comments or questions in, we'll do our best to get back to them and answer them as best we can. But for tonight, we'll sign off.
All right. Bye, folks.
Thanks.